let me introduce myself. My name's Neil Cowan, and I'm the CEO for Livius. Livius has been around for 35 years. I became the CEO in 2015. Livius has been in operation for 35 years since 1984, completing over 1 million tutoring sessions around the world. This is just our expertise. It's what we focus on every single day. Personally, a little background about me. I've grown and operated online education companies in all levels of education. So I've got pretty deep familiarity in terms of what's going on now as we move more towards online, blended hybrid models. So always happy to answer questions around that. And I'm also the author of Hacking the SAT, which is now available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Nobles. You can find it there as well as Target, and have been featured in Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine, really specifically more focused in on how companies can leverage online education better. Okay, so it's a little background about me. The goal of tonight is that if you're a parent or a student, how you can drastically increase your own SAT or ACT score using the same prep packs over 1,000 students have used to get their own perfect SAT and ACT scores. So Livius has been around for 35 years, okay? And by being based in the Boston area, we've had access to just amazing faculty who have allowed us to really curate strategies that have really worked over time. And, been able to deploy these programs to over 50,000 students and over 1 million tutoring sessions in the last 35 years. But SAT and ACT prep is our bag. It is what we focus on. It is the majority of what we do. So you are going to get the best tonight, and we're going to really focus in on what you need to do to really put yourself in a position to maximize these tests, because these tests can be beaten, and we're going to talk through that. And so this is what the first hack is. This is called the zone of score improvement. So here's what we see all the time. And let me just give kind of an example for the parents on the phone here, right? So for us parents, right, when we prepped back in the 90s or 80s, right, it was a very similar process. It was like a prescription, right? Like you bought a test prep class from one of the big names. I'm not going to name them, but we go to the prep class and we take the class, learn a little bit, and then take the test. And then at that point, we feel like we know what we're doing, right? So then maybe I just buy a couple more practice exams, do a few more practice exams, and then take it a test again. And, probably didn't improve all that much, right? This is what happens to the majority of students, okay? Is that they take that, they put basically what they look at is that they look at when is the first test I'm going to take, right? So for the majority of you on the phone today, you're already ahead of the game, okay? Because you're probably looking at taking a test in December. Again, we'll see what happens with the test dates, but for the most part, you're ahead of the game right now. Most kids, what they do is that they take their first test in March, right? Or April, depending if it's SAT or ACT. So what they do is that they took the PSAT, then they start doing some practice. So let's say their PSAT score is like an 1100. They do some practice, maybe practice test, an actual conditions practice test, maybe about an 1150, then take the test number 1 in March, get about maybe a 1200. And then from there, think, hey, listen, I already did a test. I spent a significant amount of time in practice, right? This is what happens all the time. Starting in January, you take that prep class, you put all of your effort, resources into it, right? Just like I was running in cross country my first year. It was about survival, right? Just can I do well enough? And that's really what happens in prep, is the exact same thing, right? Spend the majority investment of time and money leading up to that first test. And then what happens is that after that, they just kind of level off, okay? Now, this is really what's called the zone of score improvement. And let me just quickly explain this. What this basically means is that at this point, once you get past test 1, your mind is at a point where you are now familiar with the content, you've taken the test, and you have so much more confidence, right? You're almost overconfident at this point. And this is where the elite test takers really make the absolute biggest gains, is that because now they've got the confidence, and more importantly, they have a blueprint. They specifically understand the areas that they're struggling in. And we're going to cover this in detail, because this is incredibly crucial for you to get those huge score increases that the perfect score students do. Hack number 2, practice alone does not make perfect. Okay. So what do I mean by that? All right. So let's think about going back to that prep class. All right. So for the most part, right? So when it comes to a prep class, right, you're in a room with other people. At me, I went to an all boys high school. So I was more excited about just meeting other people at this prep class. Right. And so, I just went into the class, took the class, did moderately okay. And then, would study when I was not in the class. I don't think I was taking away a lot out of that prep class. And this is the majority of cases that occur in prep classes. Okay. So that's kind of what happened to me, is I just didn't take away a lot from it. Right. So what I did after that is after I took my SATs, I went to college, I went to University of Michigan. And then after that, I started working. I did some investment banking for a couple of years. And then I thought, okay, which happens to a lot of investment bankers, I don't love this. Let me go to law school. So I started focusing in on preparing for the LSAT. Here's why I bring this up. Okay. So when I was preparing for the LSAT, I took 6 months to study for that exam, like versus the SATs, where I spent a couple months after school in a class, just doing some practice and hopefully getting a better score. So for the LSAT, I said, no, I'm going to put all of my heart and effort into this. And so I spent 6 months. I took every single practice test you could ever imagine. I took a prep class. I took that same prep class. Again, similar experience of, getting some interesting help, but, nothing really that was kind of moving me forward. All right. And so for the LSAT, I studied incredibly hard, right? So I really focused in, took those practice questions. After 6 months, I would say I made a bit more of a movement there, but it was incredibly labor intensive. Okay. And what I am not recommending to anyone here is you ever take that approach for the SATs. Okay. You always hear, in terms of the more work you put into it, the better result you're going to get. That's not necessarily the case here. And that might not even, you might get a better score, but you may drop off on a number of other areas that are important for your college application overall. So while you can sit there and drill and kill for hours and hours and hours, you can go to Khan Academy, do all those practice questions. You may not get that nominal increase. That's why, like for most prep classes or Khan Academy, you might get a 100-point increase. I think they even advertise that, right? But to get that real increase, that 200, 250 points, that more students than ever are getting those kind of increases today. It's not because they're sitting there and they're doing practice question after practice question, okay? What they're doing is that, one, they're getting to that zone of score improvement, right? Their mind is now really at a point where they understand the material, they're confident. But now what they do is that they now practice with what are called strategies. For example, like at Livius, right? We have secrets of the ACT and secrets of the SAT, right? So for 30 years, we've been curating strategies, right? And this is what our strategies do, is that they help you, I don't want to say game the test, but what they do is that they really put you in a position where the odds are in your favor to really excel at that test. Okay. And here's what I mean by that. Students who get to those perfect scores, they have a score improvement blueprint. Okay. So you're going to want to build a blueprint for your personal score yield. What that means is you want to find the high frequency opportunities that you are struggling with. Okay. So let's take a look at this. So this is one of the practice reports that we provide for our students, right? So for example, I know a lot of you couldn't take the PSAT. You could just take this exam and you're going to get essentially what you would have gone out of the PSAT in terms of, but much more in terms of the data that's going to help you going forward, right? So score yield blueprint. So we want to find the high frequency opportunities. In all of our reports, we break it down by frequency, right? So for example, most frequent, moderately frequent, least frequent. Do not spend time on these areas over here for the most part, right? Look at the most frequent and the frequent opportunities, right? In this student's case here, we've got quadratic systems and we got polynomials, right? So 2 areas that we've got strategies for that you could focus in on. Those are the most frequent opportunities. So if you do well on those, that's going to return all kinds of score yield for you, right? So just perfect examples, that vocab and context, right? Many students, if there's 10 questions, we see on average get 2 to 3 right. That's a simple concept that just needs to be cleaned up. Boom, that's a high frequency opportunity. That's a high score yield opportunity. That's where you want to focus in on. Then what you want to do after you find those high frequency opportunities is you want to validate that against easy, medium, hard, right? So what we just talked about, if we know that what are those opportunities? Are they easy questions? Are they medium questions? Are they hard questions? If they're easier questions, then we know we've got more of an academic remediation that we need to focus in on. If it's medium or hard that we're really struggling with, then we know we need to inject some strategies to really start to move forward, right? So that's the next step, is you want to apply a relevant strategy, right? So for example, polynomials, we have a strategy that's the Know Your Math Challenge, right? So it's basically an opportunity for you to kind of rebuild those concepts, challenge yourself against those concepts. So when you recognize it on the test, you're ready to go, right? So like that's another example of a strategy that is really going to just make you much more confident for an area that might be relatively complicated. And then practice, right? So once you have that strategy, you have that practice. So for example, right, in this student's case, this was a student that if they had just done a prep class, right, and they had just focused in on the easy opportunities, they would have gotten about a 40-point increase, all right? But in this case, when we worked with the student, we were able to find what are those high frequency opportunities, validate against easy, medium, hard questions, apply the specific strategy, practice, and then when she executed, she was able to get a 220-point increase. She didn't do particularly well on the hard questions, but she rocked the medium and the easy questions. Okay. I mean, like really rocked them. But that's the interesting part is you don't have to necessarily get them all right. You could get you can increase some of the hard questions, right? So like what you want to do is you just want to really understand that test and understand where your struggles are and then focus in on that. Okay. So far we covered the first hack, which was the zone of score improvement. Get yourself into that zone. When you get into that zone, meaning taking a practice test, taking some level of prep, and then you've taken an actual conditions test. And then at that point, now you're really in that perfect zone where you're going to go ahead and be able to make that score improvement. But that's not enough, right? So what you need to do is you need to incorporate strategies instead of just practicing all day, right? That's not going to get you anywhere, or that's not going to get you very far. But then where it really starts to come together is when you get that score improvement blueprint, okay? You're going to want that blueprint to make sure that you know exactly where to focus, regardless of how you prep going forward, regardless if you decide to do self-study, if you decide to do a class, if you decide to do private tutoring, whatever it is, if you've got that score improvement blueprint, you are way ahead of the game. So what are you going to get? This is available until the end of the month, which is basically Saturday at midnight. You're going to get the SAT, ACT comparison test. That's $49. The improvement blueprint report. That's $199. You're going to get the one-on-one counseling session. It's a live counseling session with one of our academic advisors. That's $149. The Secrets of the SAT, ACT ebook. That's $49 value. All of that together is $446, $49. Okay. So $49 for the entire package. That gets you everything on here. If you want to sign up, just go to that link. That'll take you to the landing page where you can go ahead and you can sign up there. You can read a little bit more about the information. Like I said, this offer is available until 10/31. Reason for that specifically is that the tests are going to be the first and second weeks in November. And so we want to make sure everyone's registered, they're enrolled, they're ready to go. Okay. And from a timing perspective, this gives you enough time to figure out what you're going to do for prep as you think about kind of the next steps from there. But I really, really don't recommend that anyone starts any level of prep, if it's with us, with anyone else, until you get that blueprint done. Get that blueprint done, understand where you need to specifically focus, and then you can go from there. 30-day money back guarantee.